The Marvel What If series has given avid MCU fans an intriguing look into the various different realities and possibilities that could have branched out from the events that we already know all too well. While the Watcher describes time as a prism and regards it as being flexible and bendable with relative ease, there are a few moments in the time that are set in stone and are seemingly unable to be avoided no matter what. This concept of an absolute irreversible point in time is a relatively new concept to the MCU, having been introduced in What If Episode 4, and seems to be an important factor in the upcoming multiversal war, which will play a massive part in Marvel's Phase 4. While we have theorized in the past that our own Doctor Strange may have to reverse an absolute point in time in order to prevent Alioth the Usurper from fulfilling his destiny of destroying the multiverse, is it possible that we have actually seen an absolute point in time before in the MCU? An event or something that could not be changed, altered, or driven away by any conventional or mystic means. Well, stick with us, watchers of the Marvel Multiverse, as we explore the possibility that the death of the Ancient One in Doctor Strange was actually a predestined, fixed point in time that nobody was capable of changing. The catalyst for this theory comes from the conversation that the Ancient One and Doctor Strange have in Strange's solo outing. Upon her deathbed, the Ancient One takes up an astral form in order to prolong her life for a bit longer. She shares some words of wisdom and life experience with Strange, the new Sorcerer Supreme, and upon doing so, she talks about how he's peered into various futures throughout her life. Here is a direct quote from that scene. "I spent so many years peering through time, looking at this exact moment, but I can't see past it. I've prevented countless terrible futures, and after each one, there's always another, and they all lead here, but never further." Doctor Strange hypothesizes that this is when she dies, but with the added context of absolute points in time introduced in What If, it seems interesting that each timeline that the Ancient One explored in her visions ultimately led her to this point. The scene comes with a certain sense of inevitability, as if there is nothing that can be done to avoid this moment. It is important to note that at this point in time, the sacred timeline was still presumably intact and being governed by the TVA. So while it's highly likely that this was simply a predetermined point by Kang, there is evidence to suggest that there is something deeper going on here. In Avengers Endgame, we know that the Ancient One is aware of the prospect of a Nexus event. And while she may not know of the existence of the TVA or what they would do if the timeline were to split, she knows that the timeline can be split into different branches and how it can feasibly be done. This effectively means that she could, theoretically of course, steer the timeline in any direction she chose based on her knowledge of the various futures. And based on the context of her conversation, it seems as if she has in the past actually done this. Up until this point, however, the decisions she has made have been in line with the sacred timeline and the TVA. Hence why she's never actually been pruned. Yet, she still made active decisions based on her foresight to direct the flow of time to her liking. All the evidence points to the Ancient One at least having some autonomy over how she governs the timeline, and how she knows how to take specific paths based on her knowledge of alternate futures and trajectory for her timeline. So why then can she not avoid her own death? The first option, like we said, is that this was simply a predetermined and predestined point on the sacred timeline. But the flaw with this logic is that she has tried in the past to avoid it. If she was able to avoid it by altering the timeline or making different decisions with the hopes of forcing events to play out differently, then she would have created a Nexus event and warranted the interference of the TVA. This infers that she cannot change the timeline, or at least cannot steer it away from her predetermined death. Therefore, it's likely not an issue with the TVA and the sacred timeline, but is more likely a direct result of the event being an absolute point in time. The Doctor Strange that we see in What If goes through centuries of training and power-mongering to even to attempt of performing such a feat of breaking an absolute point in time, ultimately still being unsuccessful and dooming the entirety of his reality, even with his vast tenure studying the ancient texts of Cagliostro. It therefore stands to reason that the Ancient One does not have the ability to reverse an absolute point in time, and so despite her efforts to steer the timeline away from this inevitable point in time, she is physically unable to. This also spawns an interesting mini-theory as to what other events in the MCU up until now have been absolute points in time. If, for example, Thanos' snap is an absolute point in time, then it could explain why in his zombie counterpart he is successful in collecting the Time Stone, and would also indicate that he would eventually get his zombified hands on the Mind Stone soon after the credits roll on the Marvel Zombies episode, simply because it was destined and this event cannot change. If Thanos is destined to snap due to the snap being an absolute point in time, then there is nothing that can be done to prevent it, be it in the mainline MCU or in the What If series. While we personally do not believe Thanos' snap is an absolute point given his change of heart in What If Episode 2, it serves as a fun hypothetical to explore what other events may have been concrete fixtures that could not be avoided. But we would like to say that we do believe the Ancient One's death is in fact an absolute point in time and is something that it can also not be avoided due to her inability to look past this point. But anyway, my friends, what do you think of this theory? Do you think that the Ancient One's death was an absolute point in time? And what other events do you think might also be absolute points? If you have any you'd like to see us explore further, please leave them in the comments down below, as we'd love to look at your theories. As always, my friends, thank you guys so much for watching the channel. Hit that subscribe button to assemble and join our team, and have a great day.